It was one of those perfect spring afternoons when the sun felt warm but not too hot, and kids were buzzing with energy as the school day came to an end. 12-year-old Destiny stood outside Lincoln Elementary School trying her best not to cry. Her left arm hung awkwardly at her side, and every little movement sent sharp pains shooting from her wrist to her elbow. The fall had happened during recess, just an hour ago. Destiny had been playing tag with her friends near the monkey bars when another kid accidentally crashed into her. She went down hard on the concrete, landing directly on her outstretched arm. The crack was loud enough that even the kids on the other side of the playground heard it. Her friends had gasped and run to get the teacher, and within minutes, Destiny was sitting in the nurse's office with an ice pack and tears streaming down her face. The school nurse, a kind woman who always kept lollipops in her desk drawer, had taken one look at Destiny's swollen wrist and knew it was serious. She called Destiny's mom right away and told her to come pick up her daughter and head straight to the emergency room. That was 40 minutes ago, and now Destiny waited on the sidewalk near the bike racks, cradling her injured arm and watching the parking lot for her mom's silver car. She tried to stay still, but her heavy backpack kept sliding off her good shoulder. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to get more comfortable. As she moved, her backpack swung out and bumped lightly against a shiny police car parked at the curb. It was barely a tap, nothing that would leave even a smudge, but the sound of her backpack zipper scraping against the door made Destiny freeze. Officer Derek Morrison had just walked out of the coffee shop across the street, holding a large cup and a paper bag with his afternoon snack. He was a big man with a permanent scowl that made even adults nervous. He'd been a cop in this town for 15 years, and in that time, he'd developed a reputation. Parents in certain neighborhoods warned their kids to be extra careful around Officer Morrison. There had been complaints over the years, lots of them, but somehow nothing ever seemed to stick. Morrison's head snapped up the moment he heard the sound of something touching his car. His eyes locked onto Destiny and his expression turned dark. He threw his coffee cup into a nearby trash can and marched across the street toward the girl, his hand already moving to his belt, where his radio and other equipment hung. "Hey, what do you think you're doing to my car?" His voice was loud and angry, cutting through the peaceful afternoon air. Destiny's eyes went wide. Her heart started pounding in her chest. I didn't. I'm sorry, my backpack just, don't lie to me." Morrison stepped closer, towering over the small girl. "I saw you mess with my vehicle. You kids think you can just do whatever you want with no consequences?" "No, sir, I promise, I just bumped it by accident. I wasn't trying to." Destiny's voice cracked. The pain in her arm was getting worse, and now she had this angry police officer yelling at her. She felt tears starting to build up again. "Turn around. Put your hands on the car." Morrison's voice was cold and commanding. "But my arm is broken. I'm waiting for my mom to take me to the hospital." Destiny held up her injured arm slightly, and even that small movement made her wince. Morrison didn't seem to care. He grabbed her by the same injured arm and started pulling her toward the police car. Destiny let out a scream that echoed across the school grounds. The pain was instant and terrible, like someone had stuck a hot knife into her arm and was twisting it. "Stop resisting," Morrison barked, tightening his grip. "You're hurting me. Please." Destiny tried to pull away, but that only made the officer grip harder. Tears were flowing freely now, and she could barely catch her breath between sobs. Across the street, Mayor Patricia Chen sat in her personal car, a simple sedan that didn't announce her position or importance. She'd taken the afternoon off to pick up her own daughter from school, something she tried to do at least once a week despite her busy schedule. She'd arrived a few minutes early and had been checking emails on her phone when the commotion caught her attention. At first, she thought she was seeing things wrong. Surely that police officer wasn't grabbing that little girl so roughly, but as she watched, her stomach dropped. The girl was clearly in pain, clearly not resisting, clearly just a child who was scared and hurt. The mayor's instincts kicked in immediately. She grabbed her phone and started recording, making sure to capture every second of what was happening. Back at the school entrance, a teacher who'd been helping organize the dismissal line heard Destiny's screams. Mrs. Rodriguez had taught at Lincoln Elementary for 20 years, and she recognized that voice. She dropped the paper she was holding and ran toward the sound, her sensible shoes slapping against the pavement. "Officer. Officer, stop! That's one of our students." Mrs. Rodriguez rushed up, slightly out of breath. "She has a broken arm. She fell during recess." Morrison barely glanced at the teacher. He had Destiny pressed against his police car now, and the girl was crying so hard she could barely breathe. "Ma'am, step back. This is police business," Morrison said, his tone dismissive. "Police business? She's 12 years old with a broken arm. What police business could you possibly have with her?" Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was rising. She'd never been one to back down when her students needed her. "She was vandalizing my vehicle. I saw it with my own eyes." "Vandalizing? Her backpack touched your car. I've been watching through the window. She wasn't doing anything wrong." Mrs. Rodriguez moved closer, trying to put herself between the officer and Destiny. By now, other parents and teachers had noticed the scene. A small crowd was forming, and several people had their phones out recording. The afternoon pickup that had been so normal and routine just minutes ago had turned into something else entirely. Morrison seemed to realize he had an audience. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his position. "Everyone needs to step back. This girl was being disrespectful and destructive, and she's resisting arrest." "Arrest? You're going to arrest a child with a broken arm?" A father in the crowd spoke up, his voice filled with disbelief. Just then, a silver car came speeding into the parking lot and screeched to a stop. Angela Wright jumped out before the engine even stopped running. She'd driven 15 miles over the speed limit to get to her daughter, her mind racing with worry about the broken arm. But the scene in front of her was something she never could have imagined. "Destiny? Baby, what's happening?" Angela rushed forward, and when she saw her daughter's tear-stained face and the officer's hand still gripping her injured arm, something inside her snapped. "Get your hands off my daughter. Can't you see she's hurt?" Morrison finally released Destiny, who immediately ran to her mother's arms, sobbing into her chest. Angela held her carefully, trying not to jostle the injured arm, while her eyes blazed with fury at the officer. "Your daughter was vandalizing police property and resisting when I tried to question her," Morrison said, his voice now taking on a tone of professional detachment, as if he was filing a routine report. "That's a lie." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward. "I saw everything. Her backpack barely touched your car. This child has been standing here in pain, waiting for her mother." "She didn't do anything wrong." Morrison's jaw tightened. He pointed a finger at Angela. "Ma'am, you need to teach your daughter to respect authority and other people's property. This wouldn't have happened if she knew how to behave." The crowd murmured, and the tension in the air grew thicker. Angela opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a calm voice cut through the noise. "Officer, I'd like to ask you a few questions." Mayor Patricia Chen had approached the scene quietly, her phone still recording. She was dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, nothing that screamed her position of power. Morrison turned to her with irritation. "And who are you?" "Just a concerned citizen who witnessed this entire interaction. I'd like your name and badge number, please. I don't have to give you anything. This is official police business, and if you don't step back, I'll charge you with interference." The mayor smiled slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Is that so?" She kept her phone steady, capturing Morrison's face, his badge number visible on his chest and the crowd of witnesses around them. Destiny was still crying in her mother's arms, and her injured arm was now visibly more swollen than it had been just minutes before. Morrison had no idea that everything he'd done was being recorded by the most powerful person in the city. He had no idea that his career was about to change forever. All he knew was that he was right, as he always believed himself to be, and that everyone else was wrong. But across the street, still recording, Mayor Chen knew exactly what she'd witnessed. And she knew exactly what she was going to do about it. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Angela held Destiny close, feeling her daughter's small body trembling against her. The girl's injured arm was swelling badly now, and Angela could see that it looked worse than it had when the nurse first called her. Her mother's instinct told her that something was very wrong, and the way Destiny kept whimpering told her the pain was getting unbearable. "I need to get my daughter to the hospital right now," Angela said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and worry. "Look at her arm. Look at what you did to it." Officer Morrison crossed his arms over his chest. "I didn't do anything. She was resisting arrest. If her arm got hurt worse, that's on her, not me." "Resisting arrest? She's 12 years old." Angela's voice rose. "She has a broken arm. How exactly was she supposed to resist anything?" Several people in the crowd voiced their agreement. A mother holding her own child's hand spoke up. "I saw the whole thing. That baby wasn't doing nothing wrong. She was just standing there waiting." Morrison's face turned red. He wasn't used to being questioned. especially not by a crowd of civilians. In his mind, he was the authority here, and everyone else needed to fall in line. All of you need to disperse. This is official police business. If you don't leave, I'll start making arrests for obstruction. On what grounds? The woman who had asked him questions earlier stepped closer. There was something about her presence that commanded respect, even though she was dressed casually and spoke calmly. I'd really like to understand what law this child broke that justified you grabbing her injured arm. Morrison looked at her with growing irritation. Like I said, lady, mind your own business. I don't answer to random people on the street. I see. The woman kept her phone pointed at him, still recording. So you're refusing to explain your actions to a citizen? I'm done talking to you. Leave now or I'll arrest you too. Morrison took a step toward her, trying to use his size to intimidate her. Mrs. Rodriguez moved between them. Officer, please. Can't you see that child needs medical attention? This has gone far enough. Before Morrison could respond, the principal of Lincoln Elementary came rushing out of the building. Mr. Jackson had been in a meeting when his secretary burst in to tell him what was happening outside. He'd run down the stairs so fast he nearly tripped, and now he arrived at the scene slightly out of breath, his tie crooked and his glasses sliding down his nose. What in the world is going on out here? Mr. Jackson looked around at the crowd, then at Destiny crying in her mother's arms, then at Officer Morrison standing with his arms crossed. His eyes finally landed on the woman with the phone and his face went completely white. Mayor Chen? His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The crowd went silent. Several people turned to look at the woman more carefully. Mayor Chen? The mayor of their city? Here in regular clothes, recording this whole thing? Morrison's confident expression faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. He looked at the woman again, squinting. You're not the mayor. I've seen the mayor on TV. She wears suits and has her hair all done up. I do own suits, Mayor Chen said calmly. But I also own jeans, and I'm here to pick up my daughter from school, just like all these other parents. The difference is I happened to witness a police officer assault a child with a broken arm. Assault? I didn't assault anyone. I was doing my job. Morrison's voice was defensive now, but there was a slight tremor in it that hadn't been there before. Your job is to grab injured children and make them scream in pain? Angela's voice was sharp as a razor. Your job is to threaten to arrest a 12-year-old girl for accidentally bumping your car with her backpack. Mayor Chen raised her free hand slightly, gesturing for calm. Mrs. Wright, I understand you're upset. You have every right to be. But right now, the most important thing is getting Destiny to the hospital. That arm needs immediate medical attention. She turned to Mr. Jackson. Call an ambulance now. The principal nodded and pulled out his phone with shaking hands. As he dialed, Mayor Chen focused back on Morrison. Officer, I'm going to need your name, badge number, and the name of your commanding officer. I already told you, I don't have to give you anything. Even if you are the mayor, you don't have authority over police operations in the field. Morrison was trying to sound strong, but his confidence was cracking like ice over a warming pond. Actually, as mayor, I have quite a bit of authority, but let's set that aside for a moment. Mayor Chen's voice remained steady and calm, which somehow made her words carry even more weight. I have a video here that shows you grabbing a visibly injured child, causing her to scream in pain, refusing to release her even when a teacher informed you of her injury, and then threatening multiple witnesses who tried to intervene. I also have audio of you making some very interesting statements. Now you can either provide me with the information I'm asking for, or I can call Police Chief Hayes myself and have him come down here. Your choice. Morrison's face went through several shades of red and white. You could see him doing the calculations in his head, trying to figure out how much trouble he was in, trying to decide if this woman was really the mayor or if this was some kind of trick. The sound of sirens cut through his thoughts. The ambulance Mr. Jackson called was approaching fast, and right behind it was a police car. Morrison's backup had arrived, but his expression suggested that wasn't making him feel any better about the situation. The ambulance pulled up, and 2 paramedics jumped out with their equipment. They went straight to Destiny, and Angela reluctantly let them examine her daughter. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, spoke gently to Destiny as she carefully looked at the injured arm. Sweetie, I know it hurts. We're going to take good care of you, okay? She looked up at her partner, a middle-aged man with gray hair, and her expression turned serious. This fracture is bad. Looks like it might have been a clean break initially, but there's additional trauma now. See how the swelling has gotten worse here and here? Something aggravated this injury significantly after the initial break. The older paramedic nodded and pulled out his report form. "Ma'am," he said to Angela, "can you tell me exactly what happened after your daughter broke her arm?" Angela's eyes filled with tears of frustration and anger. She broke it at school during recess. The nurse called me and Destiny was waiting outside for me. That officer grabbed her broken arm and yanked her around. She was screaming that he was hurting her, but he wouldn't let go. The female paramedic's face hardened. She'd seen a lot in her years on the job, but this made her stomach turn. She looked over at Morrison and her look could have frozen fire. The police car pulled up and Sergeant Phillips stepped out. He was Morrison's supervisor, and he'd responded to the call about a situation at the school. He took one look at the crowd, the ambulance, the crying child, and his officer standing there looking cornered. And he knew this was going to be a very long day. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Phillips asked. Before Morrison could speak, Mayor Chen stepped forward. "Sergeant Phillips, good afternoon. I'm Mayor Chen. I witnessed one of your officers assault this injured child. I have video evidence of the entire incident. I suggest you call Chief Hayes immediately." Sergeant Phillips looked like someone had punched him in the gut. He glanced at Morrison, who was now staring at the ground, then back at the mayor. "Ma'am, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I saw everything with my own eyes and recorded it. Your officer grabbed an injured child, ignored her screams of pain, ignored a teacher who informed him of the injury, threatened the child's mother, and threatened to arrest me when I asked questions. All of this is on video." The paramedics were preparing to transport Destiny to the hospital. They'd stabilized her arm as best they could, but she needed x-rays and possibly surgery. Angela climbed into the ambulance with her daughter, but before the doors closed, she looked at Mayor Chen. "Thank you," Angela said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for recording. If you hadn't been here..." She didn't finish the sentence. "She didn't have to." Mayor Chen nodded. "Take care of your daughter. I'll make sure this is handled properly." As the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, the crowd remained. More parents had gathered now, having heard about what happened. Some of them had their own stories about Officer Morrison. Whispered conversations about times he'd been too rough, too quick to anger, too ready to see threats where there were none. Sergeant Phillips was on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone. Mayor Chen could hear fragments of the conversation. "Yes, sir. The mayor is here. Yes, she has video. The child had a broken arm. Yes, sir. I understand." When he hung up, Phillips looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Chief Hayes is on his way." Morrison finally spoke up, his voice taking on a whining quality. "Look, I may have been a little rough, but the kid was being disrespectful. She damaged my vehicle. Her backpack touched your car," Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted. "I saw it. It was an accident. She's a child in pain and you hurt her worse. Officers deal with stressful situations," Morrison tried again. "Sometimes things happen in the heat of the moment. The only heat I see is your temper." An older gentleman from the crowd called out. "I've lived in this neighborhood 40 years. We all know your reputation, Officer Morrison. We've all heard the stories." More people nodded and murmured in agreement. Morrison looked around at all these faces, and for the first time, he seemed to understand that he was truly in trouble. The protection he'd always seemed to have, the way complaints against him always seemed to disappear, the supervisors who always backed him up, none of that was going to save him this time. Because this time the mayor had watched him hurt a child. This time everything was on video. This time there were dozens of witnesses. This time there would be no looking the other way. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot, and Police Chief Hayes stepped out. He was a tall man in his late 50s with silver hair and a serious expression that had only gotten more serious during the phone call from his sergeant. He walked toward the gathered crowd with heavy steps, already knowing that whatever he was about to deal with was going to be a nightmare. Mayor Chen met him halfway, her phone still in her hand. "Chief Hayes, we need to talk." Chief Hayes stood in the school parking lot, his jaw tight as he watched the mayor's video on her phone. The afternoon sun was still bright, but the atmosphere felt dark and heavy. He could hear Destiny's screams coming from the phone's speaker, could see Morrison's hand gripping her arm, could hear the officer's dismissive tone when people tried to intervene. With each passing second of the video, the chief's expression grew grimmer. When the video ended, he handed the phone back to Mayor Chen and let out a long, slow breath. For a moment, he just stood there, his hand rubbing his forehead like he was trying to ward off a headache that was already settling in deep. "How's the girl?" he asked quietly, on her way to the hospital. The paramedic said the original fracture was bad enough, but the additional trauma from being grabbed made it significantly worse. She might need surgery now. Mayor Chen's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Chief Hayes turned to look at Morrison, who stood about 20 feet away next to Sergeant Phillips. The officer wasn't making eye contact with anyone anymore. He just stared at the ground, his arms crossed defensively over his chest. "Officer Morrison," the chief called out. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made everyone nearby fall silent. "Come here." Morrison walked over slowly like a man heading to his own execution. When he reached the chief, he tried to stand up straight, tried to look professional, but his hands were shaking slightly. "Sir, I can explain." "Be quiet." Chief Hayes cut him off. "I just watched the video. I saw everything. Right now you're going to hand over your badge and your weapon. You're suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation." "Chief, come on. I was just doing my job. The kid was a 12-year-old girl with a broken arm and you assaulted her." The chief's voice was low and dangerous now. "Badge and weapon now." Morrison's face went red, then white, then red again. His mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish out of water. Finally, with shaking hands, he unclipped his badge and removed his service weapon. He handed them to Sergeant Phillips, who took them without saying a word. "Go home," Chief Hayes said. "Don't talk to the press. Don't talk to anyone about this case. A formal investigation will begin first thing tomorrow morning. Do you understand? This is ridiculous. I've been a cop for 15 years. And in those 15 years, do you know how many complaints have been filed against you?" Chief Hayes pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. 17. 17 separate complaints from citizens about excessive force, aggressive behavior, and discriminatory treatment. Most of them from Black and Latino residents. Want to know why you're still on the force? Because every single one of those complaints was either dismissed or resulted in nothing more than a note in your file. The crowd that had stayed to watch this unfold began murmuring. 17 complaints, and he was still working as a police officer? Parents looked at each other with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Morrison's face showed panic now. Those complaints were nothing. People just don't like being held accountable. Or maybe, Mayor Chen interrupted, people don't like being mistreated by someone who's supposed to protect and serve them. Officer Morrison, let me be very clear about something. This isn't going away. This isn't getting buried. There are multiple videos from multiple angles, dozens of witnesses and a child in the hospital whose injuries were made worse by your actions. You're going to face the full consequences of what you did here today. Morrison looked at her with something like hatred in his eyes, but he was smart enough not to say whatever was on his mind. He turned and walked to his car, moving stiffly like every step hurt. The crowd parted to let him through and nobody said a word. They just watched him go. After Morrison drove away, Chief Hayes turned to the gathered parents and teachers. "I owe all of you an apology. This should never have happened. A child was hurt today because one of my officers failed to do his job properly. That's on me as much as it's on him." "With all due respect, Chief," an older man from the crowd spoke up. "This isn't about one bad day. That officer has been a problem for years. Everyone in certain neighborhoods knows to avoid him. Why has it taken this long for something to be done?" Chief Hayes was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy. "That's a fair question and it deserves an honest answer. The truth is, our department has failed in its duty to properly investigate and discipline problem officers. We've protected our own instead of protecting the people we serve. That stops now." Mayor Chen nodded. "Chief Hayes and I will be meeting first thing tomorrow to discuss immediate reforms. But I want to hear from this community. I want to know what you've experienced and what needs to change. There will be a town hall meeting next week and I expect everyone who has concerns to come and voice them." Mrs. Rodriguez raised her hand like she was in a classroom. "Mayor Chen, what about Destiny and her family? What happens to them?" "The Wright family will be fully supported. All medical bills will be covered, and they'll have access to whatever resources they need, including counseling if Destiny needs help dealing with the trauma of what happened today. And they'll have my personal assurance that this matter will be investigated thoroughly and handled appropriately." The crowd seemed somewhat satisfied with that answer, though the anger and hurt were still visible on many faces. Slowly, people began to disperse, heading to their cars. many of them on their phones already sharing what they'd witnessed with friends and family. "Mr. Jackson?" The principal approached Mayor Chen and Chief Hayes. He looked exhausted, like he'd lived through a year's worth of stress in one afternoon. "What do I tell my students? What do I tell the parents? How do I help them feel safe when something like this can happen right outside our school?" "You tell them the truth," Mayor Chen said. "You tell them that what happened today was wrong, that the officer involved is being held accountable, and that we're working to make sure it never happens again. And you tell them that when people see injustice, they should speak up, just like Mrs. Rodriguez did, just like all these parents did. That's how we make things better." Across town at County General Hospital, Angela sat in a sterile waiting room while doctors examined Destiny. The girl had been taken for x-rays 20 minutes ago, and every second felt like an hour. Angela's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept replaying the scene in her mind. Morrison's hand on Destiny's arm, her daughter's screams, the look of fear in her baby's eyes. A doctor came through the double doors, still wearing his surgical mask pulled down around his neck. "Mrs. Wright?" Angela jumped to her feet. "Yes, how is she? Is she okay?" "Your daughter is stable. The fracture is severe, though. She has what we call a displaced fracture of the radius and ulna. Both bones in the forearm are broken and they've shifted out of alignment. The original injury from her fall was serious, but there's evidence of additional trauma that made it significantly worse." "The officer," Angela said, her voice breaking. "When he grabbed her arm." The doctor nodded, his expression sympathetic but also angry. "I've documented everything in my report, including my professional opinion that the additional trauma prevented what could have been a simple fracture from healing properly without intervention. Destiny is going to need surgery. We'll need to put pins in to hold the bones in the correct position while they heal." Angela's knees felt weak and she had to sit down. "Surgery? My baby needs surgery because that man grabbed her." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wright. The good news is that children's bones heal well. With proper treatment, Destiny should make a full recovery. But she'll be in a cast for at least 6 weeks, and she'll need physical therapy after that." "When is the surgery?" "We want to do it tomorrow morning, as soon as possible. The swelling needs to come down a bit first, so we're icing it and keeping her overnight. You can see her now if you'd like." "She's been asking for you." Angela followed the doctor through the double doors and down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and floor cleaner. In a small room at the end of the hall, Destiny lay in a hospital bed that looked far too big for her small frame. Her injured arm was elevated on pillows wrapped in ice packs. Her face was tear-stained and exhausted, but when she saw her mother, she tried to smile. "Mama," she said softly. Angela rushed to her side and carefully hugged her daughter, being mindful of the injured arm. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. It hurts so much. I know, sweetheart. I know, but the doctors are going to fix it. You're going to be okay." Angela stroked her daughter's hair, fighting back her own tears because she needed to be strong right now. "Mama, why did that police officer hurt me?" "I didn't do anything wrong." Destiny's voice was small and confused, the voice of a child trying to understand something that made no sense. It was a question Angela had been dreading. Because how do you explain to your child that sometimes people in positions of power abuse that power? How do you tell your 12-year-old daughter about racism and injustice and the harsh realities of the world she lives in? "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. Not one single thing. That officer was wrong. He made bad choices and he's going to have to answer for them. But none of this was your fault. Do you understand me? None of this." Destiny nodded, but her eyes showed she didn't fully understand. How could she? She was just a kid who'd been playing at recess and had fallen and broken her arm. That should have been the worst part of her day. Instead, she'd been grabbed and hurt and screamed at by someone who was supposed to protect her. Back at the police station, Chief Hayes sat in his office with the door closed, looking through Morrison's personnel file. 17 complaints, just like he'd said. But as he read through them more carefully, he saw a pattern that made his stomach turn. A black teenager accused Morrison of using excessive force during a traffic stop, dismissed due to lack of evidence. A Latino family said Morrison entered their home without proper cause and was aggressive. Officer's statement deemed more credible. A black woman reported Morrison used racial slurs during an interaction. He said she was lying. No further action taken. On and on it went. A clear pattern of behavior that had been excused, overlooked, and buried. And now a child was in the hospital needing surgery because the system had failed to stop Morrison years ago. Chief Hayes picked up his phone and dialed a number. When the person answered, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need the Internal Affairs Division to pull every case file on Officer Derek Morrison going back to his first day on the force. Everything. Every complaint. Every incident report. Every time someone said his name in any kind of negative context. And I need it on my desk by tomorrow morning." He hung up and stared out his window at the parking lot below. News vans were already pulling in. Reporters setting up cameras. By tonight, this story would be everywhere. Officer assaults injured child. Mayor witnesses the whole thing. Department with history of ignoring complaints. It was going to be a disaster. But maybe, Chief Hayes thought, maybe it needed to be. Maybe this disaster was the only way things would finally change. His phone rang. It was Mayor Chen. "Chief, we need to talk about tomorrow," she said, "because this is just the beginning." The video went viral overnight. By morning, millions of people had watched the footage of Officer Morrison grabbing Destiny's broken arm while she screamed in pain. The comment sections were on fire with outrage, and hashtags demanding justice were trending across every social media platform. News outlets from across the country picked up the story, and suddenly, the small city that had always flown under the radar was in the national spotlight. Angela woke up in an uncomfortable hospital chair next to Destiny's bed. Her neck was stiff and her back ached, but she hadn't wanted to leave her daughter's side. Destiny was still asleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully thanks to the pain medication the nurses had given her. In a few hours, she'd be wheeled into surgery, and Angela was trying not to think too hard about that. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since yesterday evening. Friends, family, reporters, strangers, everyone wanted to talk about what happened. Angela had turned off the sound around midnight, but now she scrolled through the messages. There were hundreds of them. Most were supportive, offering prayers and well wishes. Some were from news organizations asking for interviews. And then there were the angry ones. People saying horrible things about her daughter, defending the officer, calling her family troublemakers. She was about to put the phone down when a new message came through from an unknown number. "Mrs. Wright, my name is Kenneth Thompson. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've been following your daughter's case and I'd like to offer my services pro bono. Please call me when you get a chance." Angela stared at the message. A lawyer? She hadn't even thought about lawyers yet. Her mind had been so focused on Destiny's injury and the surgery that everything else felt distant and unreal. But now, looking at this message, reality started to sink in. This wasn't just going away. This was going to be a long fight. Before she could respond, a nurse came in to check Destiny's vitals. "How's our girl doing?" the nurse asked softly, careful not to wake the sleeping child. "She's been resting okay, I think. The pain medicine helps." The nurse nodded and made notes on a clipboard. "The surgery is scheduled for 9 o'clock. Dr. Peterson is excellent. He's done hundreds of these procedures. She's going to be just fine. Will it hurt? After the surgery, I mean. There will be discomfort, but we'll manage her pain carefully. The hardest part might be the recovery period. 6 weeks in a cast is tough for an active kid." The nurse gave Angela a kind smile. "But kids are resilient. They bounce back faster than we think." After the nurse left, Angela sat in the quiet room and thought about that word. Resilient. People always said that about children, especially when trying to make parents feel better after something traumatic happened. But Angela wondered if being resilient was really a good thing, or if it was just another way of saying that kids had to learn to deal with unfair things because the world wasn't going to change for them. She didn't want Destiny to have to be resilient. She wanted her daughter to live in a world where police officers didn't hurt little girls with broken arms. Across town, Chief Hayes was already in his office even though it was barely 7 in the morning. The internal affairs files on Morrison were spread across his desk, thick folders full of complaints, incident reports, and witness statements that had been collecting dust for years. He'd spent most of the night reading through them, and with each page his anger had grown. It wasn't just 17 complaints. When you actually dug into the files, there were more incidents that hadn't been formally reported. Times when supervisors had noted Morrison's aggressive behavior, but decided not to pursue it. Times when Morrison's partners had expressed concerns that were quietly ignored. The pattern was unmistakable and damning. There was a knock on his door. "Come in," Hayes called out, not looking up from the papers. Mayor Chen walked in, also looking like she hadn't slept much. She was back in professional mode now, suit, heels, hair pulled back neatly. But her eyes were tired and determined. "Have you been here all night?" she asked. "Most of it, you?" "I slept a few hours." She sat down across from him. "What did you find?" Hayes pushed one of the folders toward her. "Everything we were afraid of and more. Morrison has been a problem since day one. His training officers noted aggressive tendencies. His partners complained about his attitude. Citizens reported him over and over, and every single time the department protected him." Mayor Chen opened the folder and started reading. Her expression grew darker with each page. "This is systematic failure at every level. Why wasn't this dealt with years ago? Because the culture of the department has been to protect our own right or wrong. Because supervisors didn't want to deal with the paperwork and the union pushback. Because it was easier to dismiss complaints than to address them." Hayes rubbed his tired eyes. "I've been chief for 3 years. Some of these complaints happened on my watch. I should have looked closer. I should have pushed harder. You're right. You should have." Mayor Chen's words were harsh but not unkind. "But what matters now is what we do moving forward. This can't happen again. Not to any child, not to anyone. I've already drafted a new policy for handling complaints. Every single one gets investigated by internal affairs, with findings reported directly to you. No more supervisors burying reports. No more protecting bad officers." "Good. What else?" Hayes pulled out another document. "Mandatory body cameras for all officers, no exceptions. De-escalation training every 6 months. Community oversight board with real authority to review cases and recommend discipline, and a complete review of every officer with multiple complaints." Mayor Chen nodded slowly. "That's a start. But we need more than policy changes. We need cultural change. The officers need to understand they work for the community, not above it." "I know, and I have some officers who get that, who do their jobs with integrity and compassion. But I also have officers who think like Morrison, who see certain communities as enemies rather than people they're supposed to protect. Then those officers need to find a different career." Before Hayes could respond, his phone rang. It was his secretary. "Chief, there are reporters outside. A lot of them. And there's a group of community activists here demanding to speak with you." Hayes and Mayor Chen looked at each other. "Tell them the mayor and I will make a statement in 1 hour," Hayes said. "And arrange that town hall meeting Mayor Chen announced yesterday. Make it for tomorrow evening at the community center." When he hung up, Mayor Chen stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the news vans and the growing crowd of people holding signs. Some signs said "Justice for Destiny." Others said "Hold police accountable and protect our children." "This is bigger than one incident now," she said quietly. "People are angry. They've been angry for a long time, and this was the breaking point. What are they asking for? Justice. Real justice, not just words and promises. They want Morrison prosecuted. They want changes that actually mean something. And they want to know that their children will be safe." Hayes joined her at the window. "Do you think we can give them that?" "We have to try. Because if we don't, we've failed at the most basic duty of government, protecting our people." At County General Hospital, Destiny was being prepped for surgery. Angela had kissed her forehead and told her everything would be okay, then watched as they wheeled her daughter away through double doors. Now she sat alone in the waiting room, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. The waiting room TV was tuned to a local news station. Angela tried to ignore it, but then she heard Destiny's name. She looked up to see footage from yesterday. The school, Morrison grabbing Destiny, the crowd of people. Then the anchor cut to an interview with someone Angela didn't recognize. A police union representative defending Morrison. "Officer Morrison is a dedicated public servant with 15 years of experience," the man was saying. "We need to remember that police officers make split-second decisions in difficult situations. Rushing to judgment before all the facts are known is unfair to the officer and dangerous to public safety." Angela felt rage boiling up inside her. Split-second decisions? Morrison had grabbed her daughter's broken arm and held on while she screamed. There was no split-second anything about that. It was deliberate. It was cruel. And now this man on TV was making excuses for it. Another person on the screen, a woman Angela recognized as a local civil rights activist, responded with barely contained anger. That child had a broken arm. She was 12 years old. She wasn't a threat to anyone. The officer saw a black child and decided she deserved to be treated roughly. That's not about split-second decisions. That's about bias and abuse of power. The debate continued, but Angela couldn't watch anymore. She pulled out her phone and called the number from the lawyer's message that morning. Kenneth Thompson answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Wright, thank you for calling. First, how is Destiny? She's in surgery right now. They're putting pins in her arm. I'm very sorry. I know this must be incredibly difficult for you. Mrs. Wright, I want you to know that what happened to your daughter was wrong, and there need to be consequences. I've been practicing civil rights law for 20 years, and I want to help you and your family get justice. Will it cost anything? I don't have much saved up, and with the medical bills, pro bono means free. You won't pay a cent. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. What happened to Destiny isn't just about your family. It's about holding systems accountable and making sure this doesn't happen to other children." Angela felt tears welling up. "What do we need to do?" "For now, focus on Destiny and her recovery. I'll start gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building the case. When you're ready, we'll file both criminal complaints and a civil lawsuit. The officer will face charges, and the city will be held accountable for allowing this behavior to go unchecked for so long." After the call ended, Angela sat back in her chair. Justice. That word kept coming up. Everyone talked about justice like it was something simple and straightforward. But Angela had lived long enough to know that justice was complicated, that it didn't always come when you needed it, and that sometimes the system was designed to protect the powerful rather than the vulnerable. But maybe this time would be different. Maybe having the mayor as a witness would make a difference. Maybe all those people outside the police station holding signs would make a difference. Maybe the video that millions of people had watched would make a difference. Or maybe it wouldn't. Maybe Morrison would get a slap on the wrist and be back on the streets in a few months. Maybe the department would promise reforms that never actually happened. Maybe in a year everyone would have forgotten about Destiny and moved on to the next viral video of injustice. Angela didn't know which way it would go. But she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to stay quiet. She wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. Her daughter had been hurt, and someone was going to answer for it. The surgery waiting room door opened, and Dr. Peterson walked in, still wearing his surgical scrubs. Angela jumped to her feet, her heart pounding. "The surgery went very well," he said with a reassuring smile. "Destiny did great. She's going to be just fine." 3 months had passed since that afternoon outside Lincoln Elementary School, and the city had changed in ways both visible and invisible. The community center was packed for the evening event, every seat filled and people standing along the walls. There was an energy in the room, not the angry, explosive energy from those first days after the incident, but something steadier and more hopeful. Destiny sat in the front row next to her mother, her arm finally free from the cast that had been her constant companion for the past 2 months. The scars from the surgery were still visible, thin lines on her brown skin that would probably fade with time but never completely disappear. She wore a simple blue dress that her grandmother had bought for the occasion, and though she was nervous about being in front of so many people, she held her head high. The trial had ended just last week. It had been hard to sit in that courtroom day after day, listening to lawyers argue about what had happened, watching Officer Morrison sit at the defense table looking smaller somehow than he had that day he'd grabbed her arm. His lawyer had tried to make it seem like everything was a misunderstanding, like Morrison had just been doing his job and things got out of hand. But then the prosecutor had played Mayor Chen's video. The courtroom had gone silent as everyone watched Morrison grab Destiny's broken arm, heard her screams, saw him refuse to let go even when people told him she was injured. Several jury members had looked away, unable to watch. One woman in the jury box had wiped tears from her eyes. The jury had taken only 4 hours to decide. Guilty on all charges: assault, battery on a minor, and violation of civil rights. When the verdict was read, Angela had squeezed Destiny's hand so tight it almost hurt, but it was a good hurt, the kind that said, "We made it through this together." The judge had sentenced Morrison to 18 months in prison. His lawyer had asked for probation, claiming Morrison had already suffered enough by losing his job and his reputation. But the judge hadn't agreed. She'd looked Morrison straight in the eye and told him that people in positions of power had to be held to a higher standard, not a lower one. That when you wore a badge, you had a duty to protect all people, especially the most vulnerable. That a 12-year-old girl with a broken arm was about as vulnerable as a person could be, and he'd failed in every possible way. Morrison had been led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He hadn't looked at Destiny or her mother. He just stared straight ahead, his face blank as if he still couldn't believe this was happening to him. Now, a week later, Destiny was here at the community center for a very different kind of event. Mayor Chen was standing at a podium on the small stage, waiting for the room to settle down so she could begin. Chief Hayes sat in a chair behind her, along with several city council members and community leaders. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Mayor Chen began, her voice clear and strong. 3 months ago, something happened in our city that should never have happened anywhere. A child was hurt by someone who was supposed to protect her. And while that one incident was terrible enough, what we discovered in the aftermath was even more troubling. A pattern of behavior that had been allowed to continue for years, complaint after complaint that were ignored or dismissed. The room was completely silent now. Every eye was on the mayor. We failed Destiny Wright. We failed her family. And we failed every person in this city who has ever felt afraid of the police instead of protected by them. That failure is on all of us in leadership positions, and I take full responsibility for my part in it. She paused, letting her words sink in. But tonight isn't about dwelling on our failures. Tonight is about moving forward and making real changes. Changes that aren't just words on paper, but actual shifts in how our police department operates and how it serves this community. Chief Hayes stood and joined her at the podium. He looked different than he had 3 months ago. Older maybe, but also more determined. "We've implemented several major reforms," he said, pulling out a document. "Every officer now wears a body camera that cannot be turned off during interactions with the public. We've established an independent civilian oversight board that reviews all complaints and has the authority to recommend discipline. We've retrained every officer in de-escalation techniques and implicit bias awareness. And we've conducted a comprehensive review of every officer with multiple complaints in their file." Someone in the audience raised their hand. "What happened to those officers? The ones with complaints?" Chief Hayes didn't hesitate. 12 officers were let go. 8 more are on probation with mandatory additional training. We're not protecting bad cops anymore. If you can't treat all people with dignity and respect, you don't belong in this police department. There was applause, but it was cautious. People wanted to believe things would change, but they'd heard promises before. A woman stood up in the middle of the room. Destiny recognized her. It was Mrs. Patterson from her neighborhood who'd had her own run-in with aggressive police officers years ago. "These changes sound good, but how do we know they'll last? How do we know this isn't just because the mayor was watching and the whole country was paying attention? What happens when the cameras go away and everyone forgets?" Mayor Chen nodded. "That's a fair question, and I don't blame you for being skeptical. The truth is, change only lasts if we're all committed to maintaining it. That's why we've built accountability into the system. The oversight board includes community members, not just city officials. There will be quarterly public reports on police conduct. And I've instructed the city attorney that we will not defend officers who violate people's rights. We will hold them accountable instead." She gestured toward Destiny and Angela. "But I also want you to hear from the Wright family. They're the ones who lived through this nightmare, and their voice matters more than any policy document." Angela stood up slowly, her legs feeling shaky. She'd never been comfortable speaking in public, but Kenneth Thompson, their lawyer, had encouraged her to share her story. She walked to the podium and Destiny followed, standing close to her mother's side. "I'm not good at speeches," Angela began, her voice soft but gaining strength. "I'm just a mom who works 2 jobs and tries to give her daughter a good life. 3 months ago, my worst fear came true when I got a call that Destiny was hurt. But what I found when I got to the school was worse than I could have imagined. My baby being grabbed and hurt by someone who was supposed to protect her." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "For a long time I was angry. I'm still angry if I'm honest. Angry that this happened. Angry that it could have been prevented. Angry that so many other families have gone through similar things with no justice at all. We were lucky. Lucky that the mayor was there with her camera. Lucky that the video went viral. Lucky that people cared enough to demand change." She looked down at Destiny. "But my daughter taught me something through all of this." "Tell them, baby." Destiny stepped up to the microphone, which had to be lowered for her height. Her voice was small at first, but it carried through the quiet room. "When I was in the hospital, I was really scared. Not just about the surgery, but about everything. I kept thinking about how that officer looked at me, like I was bad somehow, like I deserved to be hurt. I didn't understand it." She took a breath, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. My mom told me that sometimes people make wrong choices, and sometimes systems let those wrong choices keep happening. But she also told me that when enough people stand up and say this isn't okay, things can change. And that's what happened. All of you, she gestured to the crowd. You stood up. You went to protests. You called your representatives. You demanded that things be different. Her voice grew stronger. I'm not going to lie and say I'm not scared of police officers anymore, because I am. But I'm also not going to be quiet about it. My teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, told me that the only way things get better is if people speak up about unfairness. So that's what I'm going to do. When I grow up, I want to be a lawyer like Mr. Thompson, and I want to help other kids who get treated badly. The room erupted in applause. People were standing, many wiping their eyes. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who'd questioned the changes, was clapping the hardest of all. When the applause died down, Mayor Chen spoke again. Destiny is right. Change happens when people refuse to accept injustice, and this city owes her a debt we can never fully repay. The settlement from the civil case will help with her future education and any ongoing medical needs. But more than that, her courage has inspired all of us to do better. After the formal presentations ended, the event became more casual. People mingled, talked, shared their own stories. Destiny found herself surrounded by kids from her school, all wanting to sign the notebook she'd brought with her. Not her cast anymore, but something she could keep forever to remember this day. A young police officer approached Angela hesitantly. He was new to the force, had only been on the job for 6 months. Mrs. Wright, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened to your daughter. And I want you to know that some of us became cops because we genuinely want to help people. We're trying to be better. Angela studied his face and saw sincerity there. Then be better. Don't just try. Actually be better. Because there are too many mothers like me who've had to watch their children suffer because an officer made the wrong choice. Yes, ma'am, I will. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Destiny stood outside the community center with her mother, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. Her arm ached a little. It still did sometimes, especially when the weather changed, but it was healing. Both her arm and something deeper inside her were healing. Mama, do you think things will really be different now? Angela wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders. I don't know, baby, I hope so. But even if they're not perfect, they're better than they were. And that's because people like you refuse to stay quiet. That's because people like Mayor Chen use their power to help instead of looking away. That's because a whole community said enough is enough. They walked to their car, passing a new sign that had been put up in the community center parking lot. Lincoln Community Police Partnership Program. It was part of the reforms, a program where officers would come to the school not to punish kids, but to mentor them, to build relationships, to break down the walls of fear and mistrust. It was a start, just a start. But sometimes a start is all you need to begin healing, to begin changing, to begin believing that tomorrow might be better than today. Destiny looked back at the community center one more time before getting in the car. Through the window, she could see people still talking, still connecting, still working together. And for the first time since that terrible afternoon 3 months ago, she felt something she hadn't felt in a while. Hope. Real, honest hope that maybe, just maybe, her story would help make sure no other kid had to go through what she went through. That maybe the scars on her arm and the scars on her heart would mean something. That maybe justice wasn't just a word people said, but something that could actually happen. And as they drove home through the city streets, Destiny Wright, 12 years old, brave beyond her years, and determined to make a difference, knew that her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning.